so much for joining our Building Community Check-In today. It's been a really tough week for people. It's been a tough week for our community and for the nation. And on top of the deaths, the fear, and the ramifications related to COVID-19, our community is reeling from the protests and the repercussions of the death of George Floyd, which is unfortunately one more in a series of senseless and targeted attacks on communities of color. Social media allowed thousands of people to witness the minutes leading to George Floyd's death. They saw him losing his breath. They saw him calling out for his mother. And I think that those things were able to cut through some of the other issues and problems that we were all facing and really resonated on a personal level. Truth be told, these issues are not new to communities of color. The ramifications of that, the direct and the vicarious trauma has been building for years. The violence against humanity has got to stop. We know that many people that we work with are really hurting right now, and we want to remind you that we're there for you. We may not always understand your direct pain, but we appreciate the fact that it's there, and we will do what we can to support you. I'm Sharon Knight. I'm President and CEO of Hope Communities, which is a nonprofit that's been supporting some of the most vulnerable in Denver for 40 years with housing, programs, resource navigation. Building community has always been an important part of what we do, and the concept of building equitable, diverse, and inclusive community has always been a cornerstone of our work. This is not a new phenomenon for us. Our vision is that everyone has a safe place to live and the resources they need to thrive. We believe that every person in the community should be afforded the same respect and freedoms that will enable them to live a safe and fruitful life. And I think I would just be remiss if I didn't remind people of that commitment today. I know that sometimes people get overwhelmed by systems and issues and extraordinary demonstrations of inequity. People wonder, what can they do about it? And can their voice really make a difference? I believe that sometimes we get frozen by these things because they seem so big and we feel inadequate to really change the tide. My encouragement to you today, though, is to stand up for what you believe in. One voice, and then one more voice, and then one more voice will eventually hit home with legislators, decision makers, and the community and begin to make a difference. It's not going to be quick, but it won't happen at all if we don't lend our voice to the national, regional, and the local dialogue that is starting to occur. These shows that we've been hosting 3 times a week are to provide information about the virus, to share resources to help you get through this time, and hopefully offer some inspiration as well. In this session, it may be the inspiration to act. We have a guest on our show today who will speak in a few minutes about that. So we know some people are watching us live, but other people will listen to the broadcast later. So please let anyone that you know who you think would benefit from this know that they could go to our Facebook page to watch this later on. But if they have a question or they have a request for help, they can also email us at info@hopecommunities.org, and they can get quite a bit of information on our website, hopecommunities.org, and reach out to some of our navigators and program staff. So the news today, beyond what we discussed a little bit already, is that our curfew in Denver has been extended for a while. I think we'll get more details about that later in the day. But because of the protests and the unrest downtown, the mayor said that he would extend that curfew. So look out for that information, please. Now, I always bring you some quotes. I actually have 2 today by the same person. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. The next quote is, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." That one is actually in my office, and both of those quotes are by Martin Luther King Jr. So now I'd like to introduce our guests. DeDe Percin is the Executive Director of Mile High Health Alliance, which is a nonprofit that's committed to convening and building collaboration among many partners to help the people of Denver live the healthiest possible life. And they bring together organizations and that are public and private and nonprofits to address really urgent needs and to make sure that resources are available to the community. And today, DeDe is going to help me talk about ways that we can advocate for ourselves, things that we can do to really make the change in the community that we were discussing. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the census. DeDe, why do we do the census every 10 years, and why is it important to participate?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here and talk about the census and these other important issues, and also just really echo what you have said about this being a really challenging time, particularly in the last week or so, and affected so many communities, including a lot of the communities we serve also. So the census was actually started in 1790. It's part of the U.S. Constitution, and its goal is to understand the population living in the United States in order to direct resources and also to determine representation. And when I say everybody living in the U.S., I mean exactly that. Even if you arrived here yesterday, you're still counted. And so it's really important that we reach everybody and count everybody, because that really determines whether the resources go to the right place and the right amount of resources in the right time.
Awesome. Well, what type of questions do they ask you on the census?
There are 9 questions on the census, and they're actually pretty basic. They ask for name and age, date of birth, sex. They do ask about race and ethnicity, but it's pretty generic information. It asks about who is living in the household and their status. Are they married? Are they single? How many kids there are? But it's really essentially a head count. And the 3 things that are really important to know about it is, 1, that it's easy, just 9 questions. Second, that it's safe. The information is sort of locked in a virtual vault. It cannot be released for 74 years, and census workers swear a lifetime oath. And then the last is, it's important. As I said, it directs not only where resources go in the state and the country and at local levels, but also what kind of representation we have.
Mm-hmm. Well, some people I know have discussed an issue and worry about if they should fill it out if they're not a citizen yet. What do you say to that?
I go back to the fact that it is supposed to count every single person in the United States, regardless of any type of status, right? Whether you're a refugee or an immigrant, whether you're documented or not, whether you have DACA status or TPSS, any status, anybody, every person who's in the U.S. And so the other thing is that it is firewalled, and you may have heard some controversy about the president trying to add some questions. None of that happened. The information is firewalled, so it can't get outside the Census Bureau to other places, right? It's just locked, it's a head count, and it stays in that information vault. So it really is quite safe.
It's very confidential, sounds like.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and how can people complete it? I know I've gotten, I got a couple of forms in the mail before I actually filled it out, but I did. And what if people lost it, for instance? How can they do that?
Right. So it's really easy. So some people got it in the mail, some people did not. You can go online to mycensus.gov. Whether or not you got something in the mail, you can just go to the website and fill it out. It is also, you can do it by phone. And there are about 13 languages easily available by phone or by written, like in the mail. And then other languages, I think, also available. And last but not least, the outreach happens in sort of layers. And so the mailing is first, and then you might get a phone call, you might get a couple mailings and then a phone call. And eventually, what people called enumerators, and those are people that go into communities, and some of them have already started, and just knock on your door and ask, how many people live here, right? Just to collect that information. It is so very important that everybody answers the census and we get a complete count. And one of the big reasons is because of the amount of federal money that it brings into the state. The estimates right now are the census will account for about $3,300 for each person each year for 10 years.
Wow.
So think about how much money that is. We're talking about over $13 billion. It's so important. And it's money that will go into roads and schools and transportation and small businesses and all these other really important programs. Healthcare, certainly one I think a lot about.
Awesome, great, thank you so much. We at Hope have a couple of activities coming up around census. Later this week on June 4th, we have an event at the Gardens in Northeast Park Hill, and it's at 12:15, and there will be food there, and we'll have laptops and help people if they need it to get online if they don't have access to be able to fill out that census. And then on June 10th at Hinnebrook in East Colfax area, we'll be doing a similar event, and there'll be giveaways and again laptops so people have really great access to be able to complete that census. So we want to help you. We obviously can't do anything for you, but we want to help you to report that information.
That's great. And for most people, it only takes like less than 5 minutes to fill out. If you have a bigger family or more people living in your household, it might take a little bit longer, but it's really quite simple.
Great, great. I'm going to shift a little bit now to some other discussions. In the best case scenario, the concept of democracy is that people should be able to have a say in shaping society, and that they should be able to share their opinions, and that their opinions will sway and help the decisions that then govern the rest of the people. So there's a lot of big issues at the forefront, and we know that we've seen people with protests and with social media. What are some other things that people can do to make sure that their opinions and their voice are heard?
One of the things I think is really important is sort of starting from the grassroots up and starting from the individual up. We all have different experiences, and decision makers and our elected officials can't understand what those experiences are unless we talk about them and tell the story of our experiences. And so there are different ways to do that. Some people form sort of natural groups or affinities. Maybe it's their neighborhood, maybe it's their school, maybe it's their faith community. Right? But these are where you get together and often have some shared experiences or similar experience, and can start talking about, well, we all have this common experience. We need to elevate that, right? We need to make sure that this experience is being addressed either by policy or by elected officials. And I think it sort of builds from there, but it really starts very locally. And I think we're really fortunate, at least in Denver, that we have a really accessible city council that listens a lot to the people in the neighborhoods and listens to their problems and listens to their solutions and what their needs are. So I think starting with those affinities, like who's in your group, right? And then really identifying what the issues are and talking to city council, right? And taking those issues further up is, I think, one of the best ways to start.
Yeah, I think, in times like now, for instance, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of really critical things coming to the forefront. And I think sitting back and trying to figure out, how does this affect my values? How does it affect what I believe in? What would I do if I could do something to make a difference? And talking about that first, which might help you also find your affinity group.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so. And also, I think you mentioned earlier that things can seem really overwhelming. And this is such a big problem, both COVID and the recent murder of George Floyd and everything that's happened after that. These are huge systemic problems. They've been going on for generations, right? And you can't solve it all at once, but you can think about what are the steps that you can take, just one step, right? Or
Mhm.
maybe 2 steps. What can you do in your family? What can you do in your neighborhood? And here's a perfect example. It's not perfect, but some people just showed up yesterday morning to clean up some of the debris that was left over from the riots, right?
Mhm.
They just showed up and like, this is a thing I can do, right? So maybe it's just the 1 or 2 things that you can do
Yeah.
to help. Around COVID, I'll just give an example. I made some food, and in the neighborhood I live in, there have been, they keep moving around, but some pretty large encampments of folks
Mhm.
that do not have stable housing, right? So I just cooked a bunch of food and took it out there one evening, right? It was just a small thing. It didn't solve COVID. It didn't solve homelessness, but it was just a small step I could take.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have to get a little bit in practice that the small steps we can take have tangible results.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And I'll give an example. And I don't have the exact stats, but people have been thinking a lot about the impact of our food choices on the environment, right, and larger ecosystems. And I forget the exact numbers, but they're just like if folks, particularly in the United States where we eat a lot of meat, just gave up meat 1 night a week, right? The implications for that are enormous. And it's not a lot for one person or one family to do, but the implications across the country and what it would mean for the environment, what it would mean for all these things are enormous. So I would say don't underestimate the thing that small steps, or the impact that small steps can have.
Well, and I echo what you said about the city council. I actually emailed 3 city council people on Friday about a concern, and I was actually surprised, but very pleased. I got a response within 15 minutes from one of the city council members, and then there were many emails during the day to try to move forward on that issue. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and they're getting bombarded with a lot of things, but they do care about their city, and they want to make a difference, and they probably wouldn't have known about the issue if I hadn't emailed them. So.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize how extraordinarily fortunate we are in Denver, and I'd say in our country in general, how accessible our elected officials are, right? You can go to any city council meeting, you can go to any hearing at the state capitol, you can testify at any hearing at the state capitol. Sign up your name and say, I want to talk about this issue, whatever it is. It's an extraordinary sort of system in which people are so available, and individual as well as sort of community voices get heard often.
And we don't take advantage of that as much as we could.
I think that's true. But it's also, it can be a little nerve-wracking, it can be a little scary the first time.
Yeah.
But the more you do it, the more comfortable it gets. And I've certainly presented to a lot of groups of people like, I don't know how to do advocacy, right? Like, I don't understand this, right? And I'm sort of scared of it, like I'm not an advocate, right? But I'm going to argue that anytime you have called a school and spoken to your kid's teacher about something, or you got on the phone and argued about a phone bill or some bill or those are all examples of advocacy. We do it all the time. Sometimes we don't think about that, but we've all done advocacy, and I think we all have that skill set can be developed.
Yeah, with some of these issues that people are facing now, they're very complex and they're really systemic. And like I said before, people wonder, is my one little voice or even my little group going to change generations of problems that were there? How do we, first of all, does it make a difference? And then how do we maybe pull that apart so that we can figure out steps to take?
Yeah, well, the one thing I'm absolutely sure of is that nobody does anything, nothing will happen, right? So even if it's if everybody says it's just too much and it's too complicated and I can't, then absolutely nothing will ever change, right? That is 100%. So thinking about what is within your skill set or what is within your comfort, right? What is it that you know about? Do you know about schools? Do you know about food systems and accessing healthy food, right? Do you know about struggles with transportation, right, and our transportation infrastructure and public transportation? Think about the things that you know and the experiences you've had, I think, and start there, right? Because I'm sure that you are not the only person that has had that experience. And you start with what you know, and then sort of find those people who also have had that experience. I think that's how you build it up.
And of course, we have to get out and vote.
Yes.
And we have to vote intelligently based on what we know as facts and also on our values. So starting to think about that now for any, or ahead of time for any election is very important.
It is, and one of the things I mentioned briefly about the census that's also really important is that the districts and sort of all our representatives, from the US Congress down to the State House, down to actually our local districts in Denver, are all determined by the census. So everything will be redistricted on the basis of the census, right? And so everything counts on that. In addition, Colorado, because our population has increased so much, is likely to get another congressional representative. So, an 8th congressional representative to advocate on our behalf in Washington, D.C. And that's really important. It means we have just a little bit more power and a little bit more clout because we've got one more person there. So that also is really important when we think about who is represented and how they are represented and whose voice is heard up through our elected officials.
And I'm sorry I didn't talk with you about this ahead of time, but what is the best way for people to really get an idea about candidates and what they might expect them to do in the future?
Yeah, that's a really hard question, right?
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's just because, most of the candidates, a lot of the candidates have some sort of track record. They've been in community, they've been elected before, and you can sort of see how they've voted before or how they've represented communities before. But then, people also evolve. They learn things over the years and they might change their position. Some people are new and don't have as much of a track record. And so what I would say is get a variety of sources. And often, actually, some of the media will do really clear, side-by-side comparisons. So, here are 4 candidates, and here is where they are on these issues. And try to lay it out for people in a really clear manner. There's some online resources that are not coming to mind. I can send them afterwards that also try to do some of the same thing. Also, if you have a particular sort of compelling interest, like you're really interested in education or you're really interested in the environment, and those things are very close to you as a value, usually those groups, whether it's an education group or an environmental group, will actually rank candidates. Right?
Okay.
And say, if you really care about environmental issues, this person has the best record and the best policy, right? And sort of rank them down. And so if you have a particular compelling issue, whatever it is, sometimes those types of websites are really helpful too.
Great. Yeah, and I would think that organizations that are membership organizations like yours or collaboratives are getting different voices already.
Yes.
And that you might talk about what has worked and what hasn't worked and policies, for instance, that might be better.
Exactly. And people sometimes ask me, you work on healthcare and you work on access to care, mostly for Medicaid and uninsured and underinsured. Why are you involved in the census? And it's for exactly the reason I'm saying. It's so much of the resources that will help maintain people's health, give them coverage, depend on the census. And so we've sort of, I don't want to say taken time out, but we've added this to the critical work that we're doing because it will have such a long-term impact for the next 10 years.
And I see you are sporting different clothing. We've got a special mask.
And these are my special census tights when I do census presentations.
Well, presentations that sizzle. People,
Exactly.
People
exactly.
remember those.
I think my AmeriCorps Vistas urged me to get these tights and wear them around. And they're lovely, so I do.
Oh gosh, well thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. It's a great beginning to this conversation for people, and I have a feeling that we're all going to really be working through some of this stuff. How do we deal with these? How do we break apart some of those systemic problems and obstacles that have made barriers for people of color and other people for so many years? And what is our part in that? So knowing this is so great.
Can I add one other thing that I
Absolutely.
forgot to say? The census was originally supposed to end on August 15th, but the federal government apparently can be nimble and responsive sometimes when they need to be.
Yeah.
So actually the end of the census is now October 31st. right? So we have extra time mostly because of COVID with lost months, and so they've added those months on the end. So the whole timeline has been delayed, so you won't have missed it in August. It's going to go on for a bit longer.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't come to these June events.
No, sooner is better.
Sooner is better.
Because they will keep mailing you. You know, you're like, I got a couple mail. They will mail. They will call.
So anyway, your voice and your count matters. So we want you to definitely complete the census and play your part in advocating for the things that are most important to you.
And thank you so much for doing that. It really does make a huge difference.
So we usually do a book review with all of our shows, and our book review today is going to be by Jamie Pollard, who happens to be a communications staff member for us. She's been an awesome addition to our team. She is doing a book review on The Red Tent by Anita Diamant, and it's an award-winning book. It is a book that reimagines what it would be like for women to live in the Old Testament times. So it's told through the eyes of Jacob's daughter, Dinah, and through her we get the sense of oppression, the hardships that they experience, the travesties, but we also get to understand the wonder and the loveliness of the female relationships that are built there, and the motherhood, and just the longing that women bring to the table so often. And at that time, women had no real power, but as we know, an alliance of women together is tremendous and strong. And so it's a very interesting perspective on women during that time. I think it might be an inspirational book for you all right now. So it'll be posted on our Facebook page a few minutes after the show. So please look for it, and it is downloadable from the Denver Public Library. So thank you again, DeDe.
Thank you for having me.
For being here. So awesome to see you here, and thank you for watching our show today. Remember, if you have any questions or you need some help, reach out for us at Hope, or also if you have questions to pass on to DeDe, reach out at info@hopecommunities.org. And if you have some specific resource needs, you can also email us there, or you can go onto our website. If you look at hopecommunities.org, about us, and then our team, you'll see a list of all of our staff members with all the contact information. So we're there for you. We just need to know what you need from us. Thank you so much, and have a great week.